a special message from this month's presenting sponsor. Learn about Baltimore's rich industrial legacy through working galleries that explore the history of the Bethlehem Steel Mill, an antique print shop, a garment loft, and more at the Baltimore Museum of Industry, the BMI. Hours and information at thebmi.org. Also, use the code TRUTH50, that is TRUTH50, my special code, and get 50% off of admission at the front desk or use it when purchasing the tickets online. So please visit thebmi.org and make that trip today. Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I am speaking, well, actually not even speaking, I have the privilege of speaking with an Iranian-born interdisciplinary artist whose work is primarily in mixed media, installation, and film. Her recent research and creative projects are excavations of maternal memory at the intersection of her own story and a collective diasporic story. Please welcome Mojdeh Rezaeipour. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off with the kind of that introductory piece. Like I gave the really copy and paste. I did a great job at it too. Gave the copy and paste introduction. But could you please introduce yourself and tell us how you got started in the arts and maybe your first art making experience?
Yeah. So I started out. I went to architecture school, so that's my formal training is in architecture, and I liked architecture, but it wasn't cutting it for me after some time. So I kind of took a bold turn and kind of left that behind after just a couple of years of working for different firms, different places. And then I was like, okay, maybe I'm a writer. And I started telling stories on the Moth stage and got into story coaching with them and story producing with them. And then my dad and I started an art space, restaurant, and music venue in Fairfax, Virginia. And that's where I kind of found myself in this role of tending to a lot of creative people. So like in this gardener role when it comes to creativity. And, being around so many artists and musicians and writers and poets. And it was just, I guess I just kind of saw myself reflected in that and decided to give myself permission to start calling all the random things that I do art. Because it's like, what is art, And you asked about the first art making experience. And if we're talking like first, then maybe, my mom was always doing something creative. And so she would make these wedding altars for people, like family and friends. And sure. I'd just always be in the corner kind of playing with the leftover materials, like gluing them together and making my own little inventions. And so I think that's maybe it, but there's like a million answers to that,
No, absolutely. And I think having your parents around and kind of just either there's something where you can kind of just experiment and have that curiosity that I think that children have and young folks have, and just be able to just kind of figure it out. And it's like, yeah, I stumbled into playing with this and that, and now that's my practice 20 years later. And it's always interesting to see or hear about something starting off in a very nascent, early stage.
Yeah. And it's funny, like all the different things that I've spent my life doing in the past like 15 years seem so different from each other, but somehow my practice now is like bridging all of those things. And so, yeah.
So with that and bridging like multiple things, and I think I like that question you posed earlier, because I used to ask a similar question of what is art, and I realized I was kind of like looking down my nose at people when I was saying that, and I wasn't trying to be smug, but it's just like we have this odd definition of what it is and what it isn't, and at times, and historically speaking, that's rooted in things that aren't including people like you and I. Mm-hmm. And so that's one observation. So how, for someone who doesn't get it, who doesn't understand anything about art, in the simplest terms, could you just tell people, what do you do ultimately? For people that don't get it, like if I were to describe what I do to someone in layman's terms, I record the conversations with people. I do much more than that, but that's what I would call it for someone who just I have no idea what podcasting is. So how would you describe your work creatively for someone who has no idea what art is? And I've run into a lot of people like that, recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my work and art in general can be defined as just playing. For me, the work is just as much about what you see, which is very different, from moment to moment, as what you don't see. So it's very process led. I kind of just start with however little I know, and just clue by clue, something unravels. And I am kind of a student of this process. And, and so I just kind of pay attention to what's coming up. And and what that looks like out in the world is many different things. It looks like, 2D mixed media works. It looks like sculpture. It looks like installations. It looks like films. It looks like performances, but it's not really about the thing. And also it's about many different themes depending on what it is that I'm processing at the time. And, it can be very collaborative or it can be very personal, but it's just about kind of that devotion to process for me more than anything.
No, I dig it. And when describing what I do in the space that I'm in, I can go into that long, explanation of, it's more new media, it's storytelling, man, and really get into the weeds of it or go layman. So thank you for being able to share that. And so it brings me to this question. And don't get stuck on the word, because this could happen because the word see is in it, but don't get stuck on the word see here. Can you see or have an understanding of that finished project or product rather, before you start working on some new work? Or is there something special? And is there something special that you need to have to get into that creative mind state? What does that kind of inspiration look like? And so, can you see that finished product first? And do you need anything to kind of get into a creative mindset to get those juices flowing?
Yeah. So sometimes there's this loose vision, or maybe it's a longing. And I kind of use that as a North Star.
Sure.
And I'm blindly kind of moving toward it. But really, like I said, my work is very process led and adaptive. And in that, I don't often know what it is that I'm doing, but I just kind of trust the step by step of it and let myself go the direction that seems right, So I both have a feeling for what it is that I want to do, but it's more so about just trusting the path there to just go wherever it wants to. And sometimes it turns out to be what I said I wanted to do, I do. And sometimes it turns out to be I don't get to do what I was imagining I could do, but I end up doing something that's even more interesting to me. And so, and then in that case, I'll save that first one for another, for another project, or I don't know. Just been, and in terms of how to get into the flow, so I have certain things that I do every day as kind of this mechanism for staying sane. One of them is going for a walk. I go for a walk every day around my neighborhood, about 2 miles, just to kind of move my body. And And also I do, I'm sure many people have mentioned this to you, but ever since I did Artist's Way, like 6-7 years ago, I've been doing the 3 morning pages. I don't always do them in the morning, but I do them. I do write 3 pages every day, and it just helps me get out the gunk.
Yeah.
And make space for, so if I'm not doing those things, I find myself being stuck, otherwise I just kind of do that. I'm also always lighting a candle wherever I am.
Okay. Any particular type of candle? Because I'm a candle person, so I got to have the studio right. So any particular candle?
No particular candle, whatever is around. Sometimes I have like 12 like taper candles going next to each other and kind of like melting each other. Sometimes I have just the one kind of pillar candle, and even if there's a tea candle around, I just need to have like fire. Sometimes like things don't feel okay, and all I have to do is light one, and it's just the element. And I think it's a big thing for me, which actually has been frustrating because where I have my studio now, I'm not allowed to have candle.
Oh no.
So
I can almost see that you're running late and you're like, I gotta light a candle outside before I go into the studio just so it feels right.
Yeah, sometimes I go into the courtyard outside my studio and just like sit with a candle for like a minute. But
someone thinks something is going on. It's like, is everything all right? Yeah, just getting ready to work.
Also, my studio is in a seminary, so I think people really understand that everyone has their process when it comes to spiritual practices, and art is spiritual practice.
Yeah. If I think, and this is actually you're answering that one of these later questions I have about rituals and all that we engage in, and it's always interesting to hear about the creative habits, like how people set out their days, how they like plan out their days. And I like the habitual thing, and I like when people just say, look, I just go with the flow. I go wherever the wind takes me. And in regards to the studio, now granted, I really want to have podcasting and this medium viewed as an art, and I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're moving in that direction. And for what I do, I if I have a show or if I have like some energy that's just not right, I smudge the studio. I just, where are the herbs? We need to get this right. Or I have like a nice smelling candle like in there. I have like some like Japanese citrus candle that I'll just light, and it's just like, okay. And if it's like one of those, I really need to get something going. It's like bergamot. It's like man smells. We got to get this thing right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also, if it's like one of those instances where I'm like prepping questions or doing research for the course of the week, I have classical music going. It's just, I can't listen to lyrics because then it's just like, so humana. It's like, I'm writing the lyrics. Like, this is not a question for the guest. These are lyrics.
Right. Yeah, music is a big thing too, I guess. I usually have some Persian classical music playing in the background, and there are words to it, but the words kind of feel like home and aren't distracting.
I dig it. So now I understand the piece about that you were describing earlier about being very process driven in your work. So what do you find yourself exploring regularly? Like you finished some work, or you finished a series of work, and if you were to interconnect it, like, is there a theme that's going with it, or are there themes that you return to regularly through your body of work? Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, like, nothing's ever finished, Everything is kind of a thread that gets started and then kind of loops around, and you'll probably come back to it in some new version of yourself and understand it a new way. But yeah, I guess my work started out being very personal. So it was very much like an exploration of my own identity, my own story of, I was born and raised in Iran. I immigrated to the US when I was 12. And a lot of that earlier body of work was about, or was working and kind of deconstructing and reconstructing images taken of me on the very first days of elementary school in Iran, and kind of piecing myself back together in those ways, Mm-hmm. And that work and a lot of it also was kind of about this like halfwayness, this like hyphenated identity, like being like Iranian American here. And then, I found that work was very connective. Like it was very personal, but a lot of people were able to relate to it. But in the context of the art world, which can be a very white space,
yes, it can.
I also felt like the trauma aspects of that work were like people almost like liked it too much, or like it was like I was like, oh, this is very uncomfortable because I'm exploring something that's very much my own, and it just wasn't, it didn't feel like a safe space to like keep doing that in. And so I almost rebelled against it. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to take myself like 100% out of my work for a couple of years. And then I started working more project-based. I'd be at a residency and I would just actually make it kind of a challenge for myself to like not bring any of myself in at all, and just kind of respond to the space, respond to the environment, get to know who's around me, respond to that, let the relationships define the work. And slowly it's kind of coming back around to exploring sort of the intersection of my own story and this collective diasporic story. So I've been working more collaboratively with other Iranian folks, with other folks from throughout the Middle East, or Southwest Asia, as we are now calling it. It's like,
okay.
let's not call the place we know as home by the language of the colonizer. So that's what I'm picking up on. That's a new terminology,
Yeah.
But so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a little bit of what has been moving through my work. But I would say time and memory and storytelling are probably three things that are always present.
Thank you. And we're on the same page. I appreciate that, because as we're recording this one, we're coming up on June, and we have that great now, I guess, holiday of like Juneteenth here. And I've seen Juneteenth ice cream from Walmart. I'm like, look, man, this is not what this was supposed to be. This is not what this is. And so I kind of get what you're describing there with this kind of like rebrand of a thing. It's like, this is ours. You guys can't come in and say, oh, well, this is what we're calling it now. Nah, this is ours.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me about a piece of your work. You know what? Strike that. Tell me about an experience, and maybe in your art making process, or that has informed your art making, that holds a particularly fond memory for you, and maybe why.
So let's see. Last year, So rewind. In 2020, I was approached by the director of this institution with this collection of ancient pottery fragments that come from like 30 different sites spanning like present-day Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, occupied Palestine, Jordan, all different places, that all these like fractured places that a lot of us fractured people come from and are kind of spread all over the world now. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, wow, what do I do with this? You know, because I think the person who gave it to me at first was like, I think these are from Iran. And when I looked at them, I was like, oh no, they're not. And kind of let them sit at the corner of my studio and tell me what they wanted me to do. And the question that they kind of spoke the loudest to me was, who do we have the potential of bringing together? Mm-hmm. And so I started connecting with artists with lineages across all these different sites. And now this is like a research project that has grown several different branches and is like probably take another 10 years. I don't know. But long story short, that led me to think a lot about 4,000 years ago, and which is where a lot of the fragments are from. And I was like, what were my ancestors up to 4,000 years ago? And returning back to the element of the fire, 4,000 years ago, a lot of folks in Iran were Zoroastrians. Mm-hmm. And the sort of sacred space for Zoroastrians are these temples where these fires are kept burning for thousands and thousands of years, tended to and burning. And so I was like, oh, I really want to go be with this fire that's been burning in a temple for 1,500 years that's still burning. And wow. I was talking to my friend Nasreen, who's in her 60s and who recently was in Iran. And she was like, oh, I've been there and I've seen that fire. It's behind a piece of glass and people take pictures of it with their cell phones. And I was like, oh, that's actually not even the kind of communion I was hoping for with this fire. And so I was like, okay, what can I do to make a world where that communion is possible? Yeah. And then I started to research a lot of the temples, and I would burn the outlines of the architecture onto wood. Mm-hmm. And then I did this thing that's been a process I've been using for some years to do collage work. But yeah. So I took videos of my body and movement. And then I took stills of the videos and I printed the stills and I cut them out and I cut my head out and I put myself in the different environments. And so through stop motion, I was like entering the environments, and somebody saw one of these and was like, why don't you have a head? And I was like, that's a good question. Like, why don't I have a head? And I was like, thought about it honestly. I was like, oh, I think it's because I'm not just representing myself. I'm representing this collective diasporic body. And then that led me to ask myself a second question of like, well, then why should it be just me representing it if I'm not just representing myself? So then that led me to invite 6 other Iranian friends to join me on this journey, this pilgrimage. Great. And so I kind of thought, okay, who do I ask? And I wasn't thinking, okay, my favorite artist in the world, like I'm going to reach out, see if they can do this. I was just like, who's in my life who I want to do this with? Yeah. And so I just reached out to 6 different people from different pockets of community in my life. And some of them understand themselves as artists, like there's a musician, they're healers, and so and then I asked them to send me videos of themselves, and then I did the same thing with their videos. Anyway, so this started out just as this like idea or like trying to get to where I was wanting to go. And I had, and then I had a show coming up. So right off the bat, I even in the statement for the show, I kind of wrote that this was going to be a playground and a laboratory, and nothing was ever going to be finished. And there's like 9 screens that were constantly evolving, like having different videos going through them. But the point being that I had, going back to kind of like an earlier thread too, I had this idea of all of these different things I wanted to do, right? And one day, the 7 of us were on a Zoom call. It was actually the first time all of us were meeting in one place. And that morning I was like, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to talk to them about this. I'm going to talk to them about this. And then we just started talking, and, it's not like a recorded conversation. It's not anything planned. It's not, And we were like laughing, we were crying. It was the most beautiful thing. And by the middle of that conversation, I realized that actually the work is done. That is the work, actually. Yeah. The work is the relationships. And I cannot tell you, like, throughout the course of the probably like 3 months I was working on this project with these wonderful people, I came to life in a way that I probably never have before. Definitely could feel my Iranianness being the most alive that it has probably since I was 12 years old. And so it was really meaningful to me, and probably one of the most meaningful moments in my practice. So I know it's a long answer, but
no, I appreciate you walking us through that and, just describing it, because I think, like, doing this podcast, and kind of echoing what you were touching on earlier of having maybe, a lot of yourself in your work and how that didn't feel to be the most comfortable thing at a point. I think that's one of the things that I've had to realize in having people on this podcast and pretty much having it really open. It's just like, look, this is a conversation. I'm just helping facilitate telling the story, and recognizing that folks will say something that has a lot of meaning to them and a lot of maybe some emotional things that are attached to it, and good or bad or great or unideal or what have you. So being aware of that and really just being open to allowing folks to share their story and have that documented, that's what's important to me. And that's, kind of what you were touching on a moment ago. That's actually the work. That's actually the thing that I'm looking for here. It's not, I'm talking to the best and brightest. It's like, yeah, it's going to be some people who have some name worthiness and notoriety, but it's going to be people whose work is as valid and as important and so on. And everybody matters, Absolutely.
And conversation as a medium is so wonderful. And I really, I appreciate you doing this work. It is absolutely art.
Thank you. So I got 2 more real questions, and then I'm going to give you those rapid fire questions. No one gets away from the rapid fire questions. No one.
Okay.
Not even you, Mojdeh. So here's the thing. Let's see. I once had an idea of pursuing a Guinness World Record in podcasting. I thought I would do a 24-hour straight cycle of podcasting. And soon I realized I was taking on way too much, and really thinking about it and dissecting it, I thought it would take away from me enjoying and actually liking podcasting, because it felt like work. It felt like an obligation that really wasn't mine. I was trying to stretch a little too far. And I often revisit that on occasion just to kind of see, like, is that something I really want to do? What was driving it? And I think creators, artistic types, can be grandiose and have at times a very expansive vision. Do you run into having really expansive visions of what you can do with your art because it has this kind of free form and kind of going into various different types of media? And if so, how do you rein that in if you feel like you're becoming too grand?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, like I'm sure that you would win some sort of record. Um, your podcast has like 1,000 episodes over the course of what, like 3 years?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that actually like close to correct?
No, it's about 300 at this point.
Okay, it feels yeah, it just feels like you're always putting one out, so that's cool. In terms of like a vision being too grand, I don't think that there is such a thing as a vision that is too grand. But I have found myself being really impatient for a vision to be met. And so I think that what I do is just try to remind myself that you can go as slow as you need to, and you can do as many other sort of viable things in the meantime. But just kind of like having the vision itself will bring you to it. It might be in 10 years, it might be in 20 years, and it might completely shift by the time that you get there. But yeah, I don't like to let it go. I think I'm too stubborn. But but like that being said, I think a piece of what you're talking about is also burnout. And we're just human. There's only so much that we can fit in a 24-hour period. Or what is that quote? People say like you overestimate what you can get done in a year, but you underestimate what you can get done in a decade.
Yes.
That's a thing. But I've also just needed to kind of listen to my body more, I'm in my 30s now, and it's not the same as like I can just go for like, I don't know, like 24 hours straight, maybe like 40. I remember in architecture school, I wouldn't sleep for like 3 entire days and just like sleep a few extra hours and like be okay, but I just have to, yeah, you just have to be a little bit more gentle and like slow with yourself, and just trust that in time you'll get to where you want to go, but doesn't have to be today.
Yeah. And I'm same page. And I've had to come to that recently, where with this pace that I've been keeping up with, having these conversations, part of it comes out of spite and wanting to be right. And I think one of the through lines, and I haven't heard a lot of people really be able to correct me on this, but there's always something with folks that they want to be right. Whatever the thing is, they want to be right in that area. It may not be everything, but when it comes to this media, I want to be right. And it comes to this idea that there are interesting people who have not had the opportunity to share their story. I want to be right, that I'm going to find them and I'm going to have a great conversation with them. And it comes out of a passive challenge. This podcast starting in Baltimore, and being focused in Baltimore, and having a friend of mine say that they'd be surprised if I could find 20 people. So at a point, I was going very hard, like having a day job and doing 10 to 12 interviews in a week, and doing the research and all for them. And people don't really care how the sausage is made, but if I'm doing an hour, 2 hours of research per person, that's like a whole, or per episode, that's another 12 to 24 hours. And then doing the actual podcast, that's like a whole nother job.
Right. Absolutely.
And now I remember I had this period where I was like, I just need to sleep. I need to sleep before this next one. I need to take a nap. And it's like, you're old now. You got to figure it out, homie.
Yeah, sleep is good.
Hard, full stop. Sleep is good, period. All right. I got one last question here. And this is more of a summary sort of thing. What, in your opinion, what do people need to know about you, or about how you think, and maybe why you create, to appreciate your work?
I don't think that they need to know anything. I think that someone's experience of my work is just that. It's theirs, But I guess just to repeat an earlier thing that I said, like the work is just as much about what is there as what is not there. Mm-hmm. So that's why I really appreciate anytime someone wants to have a conversation about the work like this. Thank you. Because it's helpful to just kind of talk about, or not necessarily even helpful. It feels good to connect with folks about the story of how the work is born, which is always different.
Well, thank you. So that's it when it comes to the real questions. So now it's time to hit you with some rapid fire questions. And with these rapid fire questions, you want to answer these as quickly as possible. Okay. And in addition to that, I don't stalk people, but I have done research in various places. So hopefully everything is still properly correct, I guess. So here's the first question. What are you usually thinking when you're wrapping up for the day at the studio? Like you're putting everything away or not putting everything away. You're like, I need to go home, whatever the thing is. What's usually going through your mind, like when you're leaving, when you're locking the door and you're headed home after a day at the studio?
It's either like, damn, that was a good day, or like, I'm a failure.
It's different ends of the spectrum. That's great. Yeah. Favorite Patti Smith song?
Horses.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that whole record, actually.
I think that my partner is a huge Patti Smith fan, and I did the thing a couple years ago. This was the beginning of COVID. This is how COVID started for me. The shutdowns and everything. Patti was playing at the Kennedy Center. It was my girlfriend's birthday that was coming up. Wow. And I was able to get tickets. She didn't know about the tickets at all. And then they called me and said they had to cancel it because of COVID. And I was like,
Oh my God, I'll never forget. I went and saw Patti speak at, I don't remember exactly where, but it was in DC. And I just remember like going there, lining up like an hour in advance. And I was like, one of the first few people in line, and she shows up in her little car, and they're trying to get her and like take her inside before the fans come. And she just like stops and she's like, hi everyone. It's like so, and I was like, oh my God, you're really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. 2 more questions. Salty or sweet?
Salty.
Okay. Lastly, organized to the smallest detail or, in quotes, controlled chaos?
Chaos. I don't even need the controlled part.
I like it. Always. It's like, look, I got a process, and this is very much my process. So yeah. When I go into the studio and I'm setting up, it's like my mic is there. It's already queued up. I just need to move it into place. You may find deodorant there. You may have a half-smoked joint somewhere. There's a beer can on the floor. It's like, look, yep. I'm not an animal. It's fine. This works for me. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't move that can. That's my motivation can right there. So that's it. Thank you for being on this podcast. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check you out, your work, social media, website, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you. My website is www.mojdeh.art. That's MOJDEH.art. And it's a gamble when I am and when I am not on Instagram. But when I am, my Instagram handle is at Mojdeh. So MOJDEHR.
So thank you. So there you have it, folks. You're welcome. So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Mojdeh Rezaeipour. Close?
Yeah.
I'm close. Okay. For coming on to the podcast and saying that there is art in and around your city. You just got to look for it.